Well, those of you who are back, welcome back to the afternoon session of day one of the ResearchGate Nursing Practice in Healthcare 2021. I am Dr. Donna Hedges, and I am your moderator for today. I have the privilege of working with Dr. Robin Nelson, who will be your moderator for tomorrow, day two. Let's give folks just about another minute to sign back on, and we'll get started with this afternoon's sessions. So far, we have 29 participants with us. It is now 1:47, and I'm really excited to get started with our afternoon session. It is always a privilege to be with colleagues from around the world, and this is especially true of our next speaker. I would like to introduce to you Ms. Nadja El Fertasi. Nadja is the CEO and founder of Thrive with EQ. Nadja is a former senior executive at the NATO. Drawing upon her nearly 2 decades of experience in a variety of leadership and policy planning positions at NATO, Nadja now helps people to thrive instead of surviving in the 21st century. She helps organizations implement the secret to successful workforce development in the digital age. Having closely worked with people from over 40 countries during her tenure at NATO, Nadja is uniquely skilled in fostering trust and understanding among diverse global stakeholders in both the public and private sectors across various industries. Nadja acted as the co-chair of the Transatlantic Steering Committee for Disruptive Dilemmas, Cyber Crisis Simulation Exercise, which was the largest side event at the GlobalSec 2019 Bratislava Forum, a top 5 international security conference worldwide. Using a series of real-world crisis simulations, the side event encouraged participants to use both cognitive and emotional intelligence to increase their resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility during heightened pressure. Nadja possesses the latest credentials in the emotional intelligence space and has trained with leading experts in the field. She is a licensed neuro-linguistic programming master practitioner, a certified EQI 2.0 coach with Multi-Health System Incorporated, assessments, and a certain digital market and certified digital marketer by the Digital Marketing Institute in Dublin, Ireland. Nadja is a proven leader and is an alumna of the 2014 NATO Executive Development Program, an alumna of the 2018 Marshall Memorial Fellow sponsored by the GMF of the United States. She has also spoken to international institutions about workforce development in the European Commission, the European Parliament, and at the German Marshall Fund of the United States in Paris. She is fluent in English, French, Dutch, and Arabic, proficient in Italian, and has working knowledge in German. Nadja, welcome. Please help me welcome Ms. Nadja El Fertasi.
Thank you, Donna. I think my ego now has grown a few inches after that introduction. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here. It's quite late in the evening. I've put my son to bed, so hopefully he won't be a disruption tonight. And let me get started with my presentation. Can everyone see the screen? Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about how do we minimize the pain of digital disruption. And digital disruption can be interpreted in a very broad way. And what I mean specifically here is the cyber disruptions. When COVID hit, I think a lot of people, more than 4.6 billion people, about more than 50% of global population were already online. And of those, 77% were glued on mobile screens. But after COVID, this obviously accelerated and increased and posed significant vulnerabilities. Cybercrime went up with 600%. And why is this important? Cyber criminals use emotional manipulation technique to hack human minds. And one of the most vulnerable sectors currently is also the healthcare sector. And the healthcare heroes, as I call them, already face a lot of pressure, right, in caring for the patients, both in the hospital, in students, as we saw last time during the presentation on providing telemedicine. So I want to talk and give some practical examples and even do an exercise with you today on how do we build emotional firewalls, right? I think some of the major challenges that the nursing practitioners and health first responders in general face are the increase in ransomware attack, data getting hijacked, right? And before they release data, ask enormous amounts of money in cryptocurrency, workplace hazards, right? The resources are diminishing, but the pressure is increasing. These cracks have become evident because of COVID. Exhaustion, bullying and harassment is also one of the top 5 challenges. I think these are all challenges that you are well aware of and that, translate differently in different parts of the world. But I think it's an understatement to say that the healthcare sector, the first responders, and especially nursing, have faced huge amounts of pressure. And there is a lot of strategies, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of support and peer-to-peer going on. And what I want to give some insights on, based on not only on the theory or the practical aspect of emotional intelligence, but also based on my own experience of working 20 years in NATO, where high pressure, where being uncomfortable, becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable was kind of our bread and butter. We were either in conflict or preparing to be in conflict. I was also deployed in Afghanistan as well. I was also part of medical teams, not in a medical facility, but as part of a volunteer. So I really understand not only the theory, but also how it feels like to be 24/7 under pressure, and how do we navigate that level of stress, and how do we navigate that pressure. So here I want to talk a bit about the emotional intelligence, what it means in practical terms, and give you some tools and techniques that can be used as well to build emotional firewalls and resilience in this case. And at the end of the presentation, I'll do a 5 to 10 minute visualization exercise with you to really help you feel it in your map of the world. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. So this is me, 20 years in NATO, still well conserved after 20 years. So that's the good part of emotional firewalls. Before starting, I wanted to to take a pause with this quote, because studies also have shown that people who go into the nursing practice, they tend to have high levels of empathy, right? Which is important, because caring for others is one of at the forefront of nursing and healthcare. However, if we come from a place where we don't care first for us, right? Where if we give away oranges, we don't have then the effect of stress, then the effect of the workplace burnout, the effects of everything that is happening at the same time is magnified. So this is why I always like to remind people, everyone, and in this case, especially nurses, that we are enough by birthright. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. And I think if we adopt that mindset, then we really can come from a place of self-worth and not self-wound, right? And manage our energy accordingly. So I'd like you to take one of the greatest women of our times, at least I think so, her words to. Now, what are emotional firewalls? Let me start by explaining what are technical firewalls. Technical firewalls are basically configurations in our organizational network to regulate access on what viruses come in, right? When someone tries to install malware to infect our computer, and then, with all kinds of consequences, firewalls are meant to regulate, to allow those software or those connections to come in and to block others. Now, why is emotional firewalls also important in terms of stress management, in terms of navigating digital disruption? In an era where we are constantly connecting, right, online, where data is our digital footprint and the new oil, it's continuously we are stimulated by information, by people's words, by people's reactions, right? And if we don't have solid firewalls, like solid technical firewalls, we will keep reacting instead of responding, right? We will keep portraying the same behavior that is shown to us, or we keep walking on edge. It's like we can't control what is outside of our locus of control, but we keep focusing on what is outside of our locus of control and not grounding ourselves enough. So why is this important in stress management, in energy management, in building resilience? So you may bend but never break. It comes back first to our mind, our brain. And here I will try in a nutshell to dispel some myths about emotional intelligence that some people may have. And I highly recommend the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who is one of the top 1% cited neuroscientists, who did a lot of research on this and explains it in much more details if you're interested in how emotions are linked with our mind and how they drive our behavior. So I'm going to try and explain it in a nutshell before we move forward. On average mind has about 70,000 thoughts a day, right? And only 5% are new. So often we are on the same repeat. 5% of our mind is conscious. So the way I speak now, the way I'm paying attention is done very consciously. 95% is subconscious. So especially when we are under pressure or when we are under stress, we operate from the subconscious mind, right? We go back in all our shortcut mental models and everything that is familiar to us, everything that is new or unfamiliar or makes us feel threatened, which in this age is almost everything. We retract, we go to high energy draining behaviors in survival mode. Now, why is it important to make a difference between emotions and feelings and mood? The mind, the brain, unlike many may think, is not created to make us creative geniuses, right? The brain is designed to help us manage our body energy levels. So imagine you have a organization with different departments. You need to allocate enough resources or optimal resources so the organization can sustain and even thrive. Same thing with the brain. The brain is designed to allocate energy to the different organs in your body so you can function optimally. So often when we have a body energy deficit, for example, it's the same for surplus, it can, the one part of the brain, it's called the interoceptor system, gives meaning to these sensations. So for example, if you had a bad night of sleep, or if you had several bad nights of sleep, then you will experience a lack of energy. So you will experience a body energy deficit, right? So you can't function optimally. That translates into general feelings, can be sad, can be hungry, can be, you know, whatever it is. This is what scientists refer to as affect mood. And what we tend to do is we tend to project instead of asking ourselves, what does my body need in this moment, right? And this can translate in feeling angry, or feeling saying I'm depressed, or whatever it is. You act up on these feelings. And it's important to always check in ourselves, not only on a physical level, on a nutrition level, but also on what we're telling ourselves, right? And there have even been experiments shown that many people think they're depressed when in essence they are experiencing a body energy deficit. Now, and again, it's much more nuanced than this, but especially for the nursing, especially for the first responders who are facing stress, you know, day in, day out, understanding how to manage their energy is so important in terms of moments, right? Because, I mean, in theory, it's easy to listen to me to say this, but when you're going through it, it's a whole different story. So this is affect mood. These are general feelings, and these are universal for every human being on this planet. Everyone has feelings, everyone has mood. Emotions is a different story. Emotions are basically constructs of your thoughts. So these are learned behaviors. Now, I'll first go to this slide before I go back to the other one. During our formative years, so between the first phase evolution curve, between of 0 and 7 years old, that's where the subconscious mind of a child gets developed. It doesn't do logic. It really imprints all the impressions from its caregivers, from its direct environment. So that's how it learns when, for example, the mother or the father smiles at them and holds them. That is love, right? That is positive. Or when someone cries and something, you know, is correlated with pain, it then learns, you know, based on repetition as well, oh, that is negative. That's how it learns emotional behaviors. And these, in that age, we take from our caregivers, from our parents, whoever was amongst us the most, we model their behaviors, we imprint the beliefs. And every emotion or every thought has like an emotion linked to it. This is how we learn. And it's so subconscious, we're not even aware. Example, very simple example. Some of you, I used to have huge phobia for spiders, right? And I don't even remember where it came from. So later on, when I healed from this and I found out, is when I was a young girl, I saw a spider and my mom screamed. At that moment, I felt an intense negative emotion. My brain went danger, and it correlated spider with danger, huge danger. And that continued to drive my behavior on a subconscious level, right? So I learned to overcome the emotion. I'm still scared of spider, but at the less intensity. This is how we develop bias, right? This is how we feel uncomfortable when something is unfamiliar to us. And this is very important to understand what perception we have about stress. Stress in general is not a negative or positive thing, right? But it's really on a chronic basis and how we navigate it. first part of evolution curve is so important because that's how your belief system is created, and that's how emotions are constructed. And in some parts of the world, right, they don't learn these emotional behaviors as well. And the other thing I will say is that it's almost impossible to read people's facial expression and judge their emotions based on their facial expression, despite the Pixar movies, despite all the technology that shows us, you know, when you're smiling, you're happy, or when you're sad, because I can smile now, but it doesn't tell you anything whether I am sad or not sad, right? I can be angry and still smile. And especially now in the digital age, this is so important because this is why so many people feel isolated. So many people feel depressed because they are unable, right? You are able to recognize actually when someone is struggling. There's even a word called smiling depression. I myself have suffered of it for a long time. I was always smiling, but on the inside it was a whole different story. So this is important to keep in mind, that emotional facial recognition, read people's face, it's not to be taken lightly, because it's very, very difficult actually to read people's emotion. Second important phase is between 7 and 14 years old, where you start developing your personality based on one or both of your parents, based on your school environment. Now, my son is 8 years old and he's starting to have his pre-teen crisis already, and I hope it finishes in 1 year and not continue through all these phases, because I don't have enough firewalls to handle that, if I'm honest. But this is where you actually develop your personality around this age. Then you have 14, 25 years old. It's your school, it's your education. Now, this is also very important for the age we live in now, because COVID has disrupted the way we learn. This is one. It's all online. It's much less contact, right? The younger generations are glued on their screen. And I noticed during the last conference, where now we have education online and the telemedicine, which is a great surface attack. Universities attacked by cyber criminals, right? Because of the lack of cyber hygiene online, right? The continuous need for emotional validation by going on social media, repeating it. So this is actually different generations went through it differently. Right? But it's important to keep in mind that the current generation that is going through schooling and education, it's a whole different impact on their brain waves. And the same thing as between 25 and 35 years old, when you go into the workforce. Now, student interns are already being prepared during their internship in caring for patients and dealing with high levels of vulnerability, and often they lack that emotional resilience and emotional firewalls. So it's important to understand the basis. And it's not to say that after 35 years old we stop, evolution stops. Not at all. It is actually, people ask me, well, how do I change my thoughts? How do I become aware? Well, here's where mindfulness comes in, right? It's to really not necessarily trying to change your thoughts, but learning how to stay in the moment, learning how to navigate your inner dialogue. And I will move back to that at the end. I just want to show one quick slide based on, I don't know if you know the founding father of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, who did a lot of research on, instead of focusing on what is happiness or defining what is happiness, which is a very abstract way of and definition, right? Everyone wants to be happy. Well, what does that mean? And so he focused on measuring well-being, which you can actually measure, right? Like the weather, you can measure the temperature, the intensity of the rain. Same thing for, you can measure the positive emotions, the meaningful relations, the sense of accomplishment and achievements. And they came up with a ratio of high levels of well-being is a ratio of 80% positive emotion and 20% negative emotion. And it's important to have a mindset that you cannot have this ratio all the time. I think many people have it the other way around. And to not see negative emotions as bad, and to not see positive emotions as positive, right? There's no right or wrong feeling. And I think we now live in society where we maybe are taught or pushed to think we only need to feel positive emotions. Negative emotions is part of who we are as well. How do we teach people? How do we equip people to navigate these emotions, right? And not necessarily label them as positive or negative, but to understand that life is ebb and flow, and how you feel the emotion, but behave differently is the key, is the secret sauce. And you can teach yourself to move up the emotion scale. I think it's very difficult if a nurse has been working 2 days in a row, 48 hours, exhausted, and you tell her, buckle up, you know, everything's okay. The mind is not going to capture that, right? She or he do not need to hear that in that moment. Their emotions need to be validated. Right? They feel exhaustion, their body energy deficit is probably at an all-time low. On top of them, they have all these other personal pressure. So it's a new way of talking, interacting with each other, and validating emotions as valid, right? And in different parts of the world and different cultures, they're more comfortable with it than others, right? So I think this is one challenge in any sector, but especially in the healthcare sector, is how do you create a culture and psychological safety for people to be open about it. I work with so there are 3 main schools of thought when it comes to emotional intelligence. There's Peter Salovey from the Yale Emotional Intelligence Center. There is Daniel Goleman, and then there was, still is, Raven Bar-On, who designed the EQ model and who was issued by the multi-health systems. That is more specifically for the workforce, right? And it's a toolbox. When people ask me what's the difference between emotional intelligence and IQ, I always say your IQ is your elevator, your EQ is your trajectory upwards. So you need both. Your IQ is concerned with strategic long-term thinking, as your EQ is for coping with your immediate challenges. It's related to your behavior. So this model can help people, especially nurses, have coping mechanism and adaptive styles in the way they behave to their immediate challenges, right? And leverage emotional intelligence to really manage their energy levels. Now, for the sake of this presentation for tonight, I'm only going to touch on 3 markers, which I think can be a great framework for people to use. Is self-regard, empathy, and flexibility, right? I think how do you create agile human beings? Human beings are not technology or systems, right? Change happens to us, but transitions and disruptions happen within us. It's a process which is felt in different intensities and different ways. So first start with understanding self-regard. How do you view yourself? People who tend to have low levels of self-regard may suffer from inferiority complex, a lot of insecurities, doubt, not feeling good enough, right? And especially younger people who just enter the workforce, who are just studying for the students, suffer from this a lot because they don't have that, mental muscle of confidence, perhaps whatever it is. So it's really important to help people have healthy levels of self-regard, especially in the nursing, because in the nursing, when you care for others, you tend to over care. I always say, give away oranges you don't have. What happens then? You're going to deplete yourself at some point, and then you're no good to no one. Again, extreme. If you have too high levels of self-regard, then you may be very self-centered, right? You may not have a large sense of social responsibility, doing what's good for the greater good for the team. So it's always finding a balance and navigating. And sometimes we find ourselves at one or the other or in between, right? It's not a quick fix, or it's not a static process. It's always checking in with ourselves. What are some of the beliefs I grew up with, right? Or if we have a belief that feels very uncomfortable, to not fear, to actually interesting point of view, right? And to understand, because that's how you overcome the emotion and then the experience to wisdom. Empathy is how sensitive we are to other people's needs and emotions. And empathy is often thrown around as a buzzword, right? But it's actually very difficult to exercise continuously. We are either in our heart space or head space. We can be in both. So when we have a very analytically trained mind, or when we're very focused, it's difficult to drop in our heart space. And it's difficult to be sensitive to needs of other people. Right? And I think in the nursing example, they're probably continuously, right, in the heart space trying to care for other people. But at some points, they might find themselves in the head space and feeling guilty and not having enough empathy. So it's really understanding again that empathy is not something that's static to have, that you cannot have too much of it or less. It's not to have any label about it, but it's just to have an intention, to be aware on where you sit and understand that when you're focused with your analytical mind, your right part of the brain, you can be in your left part of the brain. You can be in your heart space where, you know, the empathy is regulated. So I always say to, if you, for example, find yourself in a situation where you are unable to exercise empathy, don't judge yourself, right? Just bring your awareness into it and just know that no one can be 100% 24/7 in empathy mode. Even I, when I'm very focused on creating scenarios or busy, and my 8-year-old son comes, mommy, I love you, I snap at him, right? And then we have to have the whole discussion that mommy is sorry, but she was focused. and then that's it. And everything that we tell ourselves in a negative way drains our mental energy. Imagine you have a bank account, and the bank account depletes very fast with every negative thought. And this is why it's so important to be very deliberate on our belief system and what we tell ourselves. Negative thoughts construct negative emotion, which deplete our energy. Body energy deficit also depletes our energy. So it's a combination of mental, emotional, and physical health. Flexibility. Some people are very flexible in adapting to the change. Others, it's much more difficult for them, right? It's a grueling internal process. And depending how easy it is to change and to adapt to your environment, you'll again deplete yourself, and you won't be able to cope with stress as much or as good as others. So it's understanding where you sit, right, and having a frank conversation with yourself, and even in, you know, in team cultures or in team groups, on different levels of flexibility and the support that people need to be guided to where you want to be. Everyone has a different map of the world. Everyone has different levels of flexibility. But this framework can really help you guide people or lead people, or from a personal change agent perspective, but also from a systemic leadership perspective and from an educational perspective, and really focusing on how do I view myself? How do I view myself in relationship to others? How do I view others? And what is my level of comfort in changing my behavior, not necessarily my identity, right? EQ is all about behavioral change, having different response options without feeling that you are changing as a person. What are some of the emotional firewall toolbox? I have apologized that the picture is not very inspiring, but I thought it's a nice analogy, if I say it correctly in English, to really see the EQ as a toolbox, to not only use the hammer or the screwdriver for everything, but to change and to become comfortable with it. First technique is referred to as the Navy SEAL box breathing technique, which we're going to exercise. And it's basically anchoring ourselves in our breath, right? It's the 4 seconds breathing in, holding our breath for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, waiting 4 seconds, and doing it again. Even if you do this for 1 or 2 minutes, in the moment, it will calm down the mind, our monkey mind, which has, all these thoughts going on, very cluttered. Average brain can do no more than 7, 8 decisions at a time. So when we feel overstimulated, we get, very we go into survival mode, and the stress levels increase in a negative association. So breathing is your, is the best way to really calm down the mind in the moment, right? It's not going to solve the crisis. It's not going to, make anyone perhaps better, but in that moment, it can help you declutter the mind and really ground yourself so you can have healthier response option. And the more often you practice this, the better you are grounded. I always say, I always use meditation a lot as well, but it's how can you become the mountain, right? So even if there are storms, even if it's raining and thunder, you cannot control. This brings me back to the second point of view. And I invite you to read Dr. Seligman's work on learned helplessness versus learned optimism. Right? Learned helplessness is basically high levels of pessimism. It's people who tend to believe that everything, they cannot help anything, right? Everything is outside of their control, and everything will go wrong, and it's a very complacent behavior. And there's no judgment here, but it's, we are all in that situation to different extent. Versus learned optimism is really understanding on, okay, I am here in this situation. These are the cards that I've been dealt. I cannot control John, Joe, Maria, whoever. I cannot control my external environment. I can only control how I respond. This is reaction versus responding, right? And to practice that, to really become comfortable, this is why for nurses, it's very important to work on self-regard and self-confidence, because tend to say yes, 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 and help everyone else, but then, to their own detriment. So it's really important to have very healthy boundaries and focus on what you can control, and be okay that there will be all kinds of opinions in the moment. There will be, things that will go outside of your control, but in that moment, right, in order to reduce your stress levels, what can I control? What's the next right step? And then the next right step, without looking at the peak of the mountain and worrying ourselves to that before even taking one step towards the, still on the ground. This is what we tend to do. We project in the worst case scenarios, because this is what most of us have been taught as a child, but it's also a defense mechanism from, keeping us in survival mode. Everything that is unfamiliar to the brain, everything that's not in its filing cabinet is a threat. So it's our job, not only physically, emotionally, to tell our brain we are safe, especially in the healthcare sector, in the nursing sector, when everything goes so fast, when the pressure is up, to really remain calm and not seeing it as a threat, right? So important, because then you can act in a healthy, not even in a healthy, but in a rational, right, in a logical way. And it doesn't mean, when I was deployed, I remember there was this explosion, and I was with the nurses, and in the moment, I was very focused. I was very calm. I was helping. After that, I remember I was shaking. I didn't even know how I could stay calm, right? But that's something that we were trained to do. But then afterward, you need to have a way of letting it out, whether it's, with a support system or with someone. It's very important. Emotion is energy in motion. It has to flow out of you, right? The third thing is to drop in your heart space. We will exercise this now, and this doesn't mean that, kumbaya, everything is okay, not at all. But there has been research that has shown that the heart has independent neurons from the mind. It can even make decisions on its own. It's the first organ in your entire, is the most intelligent organ in your entire body, and the first one to catch life in embryo. When we drop in our heart space, we don't make decisions based on the spaghetti or monkey mind, right? The clutter of the mind, but really from a grounded place. And we can practice this, right? And maybe when you drop in your heart space, maybe a response option is to express anger, not to display anger, but to express a negative emotion. So it gets out of you, right? It doesn't get stuck and blocks your body. Perhaps it is setting boundaries, whatever it is for you. It doesn't necessarily mean unconditional love. It just means to not stay in the cluttered mind, which is very distracted. This brings me to the fourth point, is navigating our inner dialogue, right? The most important words we will ever say are the ones to say ourselves. And I think if we are really frank with ourselves, then often we speak to ourselves like we would never speak to anyone else. And it's so important the words you tell yourself, even if it's subconsciously. Often it's subconsciously. So we have to catch ourselves and be compassionate. The most resilient people on the planet are those that are compassionate with themselves. It doesn't mean that they are not self-critical. It doesn't mean that they don't grow. That doesn't mean, because it's very important to stay grounded and to learn and to minimize the risks of mistakes, which can be detrimental in the health sector. But it's how we speak to ourselves, right? Not scare ourselves, shame ourselves, make things worse than they are. Right? I think I always say being human now is being a magical mess. It's okay. And to not put that additional pressure on ourselves. So all we're doing is minimizing that pain, right? Focus exercises. I take an example, when you look at a lion or a cat before they're going to catch their prey or their fly, they're laser focused on their target, right? Energy flows where attention goes. So when we're doing one thing, and I know this is very difficult when we are, under pressure and doing multiple stuff, but really train ourselves to stick whatever we're doing, to really focus literally our energy, our eyes, the way we look on the thing, to be completely indulged in the action we're doing, even if it's taking blood pressure of someone, right? And understanding the emotion we feel. And this is something that can be practiced. You can become better at it over time. And some days it won't work, but even if you practice it, like you say, for 1 week, every time I take blood pressure of someone, I'm going to make an effort to move from neutral to positive emotion, to really be focused and just practice how it feels. For someone else, can be another activity, but the more you practice, the better you get at it. Focus is so important because we think multitasking is good for the brain. It depletes our energy, it increases our decision ability, and it actually can lead to suboptimal response option and decision making. The last thing I will say is to find stress relief exercises in the moment, right? I mean, yes, one part of it is holistic lifestyle change and all that comes with it, which is very important. But you also want to have practical ways. How can you relieve stress, and have that and know that about yourself? For example, my son, who was one of the main causes of my stress, still brought me this from school and said, "Mommy, every time I stress you, you just pick up the star and start pushing the buttons," right? Already at that age, he's highly manipulative, emotionally manipulative. But for example, you can have that with you, or you can have, breathing, or you can watch 5 minutes of comedy to boost your positive emotions. And this may sound very counterintuitive if you're working in a very stressful environment where you see a lot of negative emotions or situations, and that you are going to watch comedy, you may feel like, what, this is very against, societal norms. It's very healthy, because when you distract your mind, right, from everything goes on and you laugh, you reduce the cortisol hormones, and you increase your serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine for that moment, which will give you energy for the next hour or 2 hours. So it's really learning to think long-term in terms of lifestyle changes, but also in shift, right? Can I make the shift as less painful as possible and stay focused and alert? And if that requires 5 minutes comedy every hour, or 5 minutes laughing with your colleagues, right? And having no judgment about that, right? Not projecting yourself, what will people say or think or do, is so important. It's always remembering, I need to navigate up the emotional skill, right? And when you find yourself down in emotional skills, so a lot of negative emotion, that is okay as well. Don't judge yourself. Sometimes to feel good is to feel negative emotion. I think often we confuse that, people can be sad, and there's absolutely nothing wrong. It's really helping people validate their experience. But that resilience is built is how you speak to yourself, what strategy you have in the moment, learning to drop into your heart space more often, so you come from a place of non-judgment, and understanding what you tell yourself, and learning focus exercises. So I don't know how much time I have left. If we still have 5 or 8 minutes, Donna, do we still have that?
Yes, you do, Nadja.
Okay, then I'd like to invite everyone to take a moment and join me on a very brief visualization exercise that will demonstrate on how you can drop into your heart space and how you can expand on this exercise yourself, right? And I'm only going to demonstrate a short version because of the time. So I invite you to disconnect from your computer, not from the call, but just, make yourself feel comfortable, turn off your camera, maybe dim the light, make sure you won't be disturbed for the next 5 to 10 minutes, so you really can benefit from this experience. And if you are someone who doesn't like to visualize, I always say we are masters in visualizations because we always project in the worst case scenario. So just take pen and paper and, maybe do this while reflecting, or just listen without participating. It's really what we want you to feel comfortable. And then I invite you to close your eyes and just make yourself feel comfortable. And set an intention to keep an open mind, right? Especially if this is the first time you've done it, it may seem very strange or weird, which is okay. Don't judge, just observe. And I invite you to start breathing. So breathe in on the count of 4. Hold your breath for the count of 4. And then breathe out on the count of 4. And you wait 4 seconds again, and you breathe in on the count of 4. Feel the airflow going up your lungs. Hold your breath for the count of 4. And then breathe out on the count of 4. And just continue with this process. Breathing in on the count of 4. Really anchor yourself with the airflow that flows up and down your nostrils, in and out of your lungs. And thoughts may come, just don't engage, don't try to suppress. Just observe and always bring your awareness back to the airflow that flows in and out of you effortlessly every second of every moment of every day. So take a moment to appreciate the airflow, your breath. Breathing in on the count of 4, holding your breath for the count of 4. Breathing out for the count of 4. When we feel overwhelmed, when we feel like the rug is pulled beneath our feet, when we feel anxiety, we often forget that actually everything we need in that moment is within us. because the most important resource we have is our breath. Without our breath, we wouldn't be alive. So I want you to appreciate the airflow that flows in and out of you effortlessly every second of every moment of every day. And again, your thoughts may come and go. Just don't judge yourself. We are not meditating here. We're just connecting with our breath. And then I'd like you to connect with your body. Just notice your body temperature. Do you feel warm? Do you feel cold? Do you feel comfortable? Often we live in a world, we are so distracted by technology, by information, that we forget to connect with our body. A body which is navigated by our mind. And we believe they are distinct, but they are one. And it's our job to be really mindful of how we feel, how we treat our body. Notice that every organ does what it needs to do, how it needs to do it without you lifting one finger. Isn't that a miracle in itself? So just take a moment to appreciate. Notice your beating heart. Your beating heart that pumps blood in every vein of your body. Your beating heart which pumps oxygen into your brain so you can not only survive, but thrive. I really want you to drop into your heart space. Your heart, which is your most intelligent organ in your entire body. Your heart, which was the first organ to catch life in embryo. Your heart, which always beats. No matter how many challenges are thrown at you, no matter how worse the situation gets, your heart is still beating. Every minute is beating for you. So just take a moment to appreciate. Times when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel anxious, we can drop into our heart space and remember we are still alive, we are still breathing, and we are still alive in that moment. We're not living in the past and we're not yet in the future. We are here now with a beating heart. That's all that matters in that moment. Notice how your feet touch the ground. Notice any sound in the room. Sometimes we forget that we have a sensory system that picks up on so much information, so many signals that transmits it to our mind, and we are oblivious to it. So learning how to ignite our sensory system, our senses of smell, touch, sight, and hearing, so important to feel calm, to feel grounded, and to feel centered. To give our mind a rest of thinking, of worrying. So just notice any smell. Notice any taste on your taste buds. Notice the glows on your skin. Really learn how to ignite your senses. Your senses which pick up on so much information and which can help you ground yourself and calm yourself in the moment. And I would like you to think of one outcome you would like to have achieved by the end of the day. I would like you to see yourself going to bed. But before closing your eyes and drifting into sleep, I want you to see yourself focusing on the feeling that you want to feel based on one outcome. Is it feeling successful? Is it feeling confident? Is it feeling valued? Is it feeling rested? Is it feeling at peace? We think that we chase goals, that we chase objectives because of the goal, because of the objective, but it's always because we want to feel a certain way after having achieved that objective. It's very important to learn and train our mind to understand what is the outcome and the feeling we want, so we can feel that already now and make unfamiliar situations familiar to our mind and reduce our stress and anxiety levels. So just focus on the feeling you want to achieve before going to bed, whatever that is for you. And as you sleep, you think of 3 things you appreciate and why. It can be very small. Just you appreciate you're alive. You appreciate a colleague had coffee with you. You appreciate helping someone out, whatever it is. 3 things and why. And when you do this over the course of 30 days, you will see a significant shift in your mind, in training to focus on what you have, on what is, instead of lack, which again will regulate your positive emotions and reduce your stress levels. And when you're finished, you can slowly open your eyes. And come back to the virtual room.